So welcome, everybody. I'd like to call to order the St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2022 Ordinance Committee meeting. I also would like to point out it's a full moon today. So just keep that in mind as we're going through our agenda. So with that, can we do the roll call, please?
Here.
I think I'm here. No, I'm here.
Here. We're all present and accounted for. Everyone hasn't had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting, February 28th. If not, we can take a minute for you to peruse those, but otherwise, I would be happy to entertain a motion to.
So moved.
Second.
Councilor Johnson?
Yep.
Councilor
Yes.
Katerina?
Yep.
Councilor Hamel?
Yes.
Excuse me.
So we have three agenda items this evening. They're all three discussion items. They're not listed as action items, but actions could result from discussion items. So and just to add suspense to the meeting today, so that there's a possibility. So stay tuned for that. The first one, and I understand we have some people who are waiting on Zoom to join us virtually on the first discussion item, chapter 1018, the marijuana ordinance. And this is based on a letter that was sent to us, which we would be happy to entertain from Mr. Burke, from Mr. John Burke, who has actually participated very actively, over the time that it took us to vet these ordinances and to adopt them following state statutes in the past couple of years. So with that, John, I'd be happy to let you lead off on this one if you are so inclined. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, do you want to move public comment to the front end of the agenda?
I guess we should do that.
Okay.
In order for him to be able to speak. Yes,
So
thank you.
would anyone, if you'd like to speak on the subject of marijuana, please raise your hand. We'll bring you into the meeting.
Well, we're bringing John in the meeting, Mr. Chair. Do you mind if I add?
Go right ahead.
Slight commentary here to maybe shed some light on the origins of why this is before us. So John Burke and I, the attorney for many of the marijuana cultivators in town, John and I have a pretty good working relationship. We talk on a semi-frequently basis, probably not as frequent as he wants to, because I often say I'll get back to him and then disappear for 2 weeks, but that's not by design, I promise. But essentially, I think I'm generally aligned with a couple of quick things that I think we could do. The marijuana ordinance at this point has we've lived through it for 2 years. In particular, there's a couple of things that we essentially require for a marijuana license that I don't think are overly necessary. An example would be an operating agreement with the entities that are doing the growing. I'm a small business owner. I don't hand my operating agreement to anybody. I have licenses through the state for different things, and I don't see a whole lot of value in providing that type of paperwork. And frankly, I don't know if it's the government's business of an operating agreement. So there's just one example. Another example is since we started, I think that I think our fees should at least be re-examined and have a discussion. There's a couple of one of our fees essentially charges what could be a very small medical caregiver, and in my opinion, a higher fee that we incur as a town to license them. And I think that it's only fair that we charge these people fairly for their business that they're in. There's no doubt in my mind that John will push for a couple other things, but those are my two immediate things that I think are worth us discussing, and I'll let John take it from here. But I did want everybody to know where this is coming from and why it's on our agenda. So.
Okay, thank you.
So Mr. Burke hasn't indicated he wishes to speak at this time, but we do have two other hands up. Oh, John has just put it up. Can we take a few other public comments prior to Mr. Burke? Sure,
Yes.
okay with that?
Yeah.
So Ms. Bell, I'm going to allow you to talk. If you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
You can.
Okay. I'm from the main lab, and our problem is the licensing fee. We feel that they're unreasonable. Every year we'll be paying over $5,000. We're in the same facility. It'll just be one inspections for two licensing. We have done our due diligence and hired a licensed engineer to make sure that we were up to code with everything. And I did Attorney Burke's letter, and I felt that his suggestions for the fees seemed reasonable and in line. And we're hoping something could be changed with that.
Yes.
Ms. Bell, can I ask you a couple questions? Just because every time we do this, we have to get slightly re-educated. You, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have one facility and you're operating, probably cultivating a medical side and cultivating the adult side, and you're paying, is that a correct statement?
We are just manufacturing. So
Okay.
we're going for our adult license. Well, we
Gotcha.
Approved yesterday.
And you said, so what,
And
so
we're
what,
adult.
so what 2 licenses have we charged you for?
Well, right now it's just been medical and we're going for our adult license.
Gotcha. And but it's the exact same facility. Is that correct?
Exact affiliate, yes, same location.
And are you, but you are required to keep those grows separately within it, or?
We're not a grow. We are.
I'm sorry. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, we will do one, like 2 days, we might do medical, and 3 days we might do adult. So it's not, they won't be on the same day.
But it's the same facility doing the same
Same.
manufacturing.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. I just think it's worth talking to the small business owners and understanding your specific situation.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a discussion, so we're trying to understand the issues that are of concern, number one, and what the context is for those. So that's helpful. Thank you. And then let's have, who else is there? We got,
We'll have Mr. Sands speak next.
okay, thanks. Welcome.
Hello?
Thank you, Mr. Sands. Go right ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Tito or Tomas Sands. I am the owner and operator of Dorigo Enterprises and mainly medical at 137 Pleasant Hill Road. I just wanted to speak in support of John's letter. I've read both of them. I agree. There needs to be some changes. Similar to Ms. Bell, we've paid multiple fees, transitioning from the medical space to the adult use space. We've incurred both of those business as well as license fees. I'd also like to bring up in the conversation possibly revisiting the idea of entertaining adult use stores as well as medical retail stores, just putting it on the table that we're interested in conversations. We obviously don't want to change too abruptly, but I think it's appropriate this time after a number of years that we sort of have these conversations. And lastly, just put on the record that we are a small business operator and these fees can be problematic for operations as well as trying to launch into some of these more expensive ventures. Obviously, most cost savings we can get, the better.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions from the council, from my committee members on that? So thank you. And then finally, Mr. Burke, just so we get a bit of a wind up there for Mr. Burke.
Sean,
Sean, you
should
wanna
be
go
all
ahead?
set.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chairman Hamel and the rest of the committee today for this discussion. So I prepared this letter in part on my discussions with Councilor Johnson to try to address some of the concerns that that I have seen and have experienced as a practitioner in this industry in helping these applicants and as well as these licensees obtain licenses in Scarborough. And so I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have, but I wanted to try to provide sort of a framework where I thought, based upon the applications that have been submitted and the documents that the town, that I talked to Mr. Gallagher frequently about, I provided a list of those documents that I think are really the core documents the town looks at when evaluating an application for a new license, as well as evaluating a renewal application. And, for multiple reasons, it's a good thing, right? Because it simplifies the application process, less burdensome on the town. And much of the information, the paperwork, I'm not necessarily talking about taking away, performance standards, but the actual paperwork connected with it just allows a much more straightforward application. And if there are issues, let's say, for example, with concerns about cameras, that information would get discovered in an inspection, and the applicant or the licensee, depending on which, where they're at, could provide additional information to the town, which, as Mr. Gallagher is aware, that has happened before. So hopefully that's helpful for future consideration. I'm not going to just go through that unless you have specific questions about it. The fees, this is something I've been advocating for change since they were established in 2019. And I've spent a considerable amount of time thinking about what are reasonable fees. And the more that I think about it, the harder it is to really lock down whether even the fees that I'm proposing are reasonable. But I do think they need to be reduced. And Ms. Bell, I think, was giving you guys an example of what I call a double licensing fee. And I broke that down for you in that letter. There's nowhere in any ordinance or fee schedule in our community where we charge a business $5,900. And I've looked. And when you think about a food handler's license as an example in this, a food handler could be a kitchen that produces edible products. And so if we're charging one of those kitchens $220 just to get a license and have an inspection done, and a medical manufacturing facility is charged $2,500, what is the town doing differently? The answer to the question I'm fairly certain of is nothing, other than that particular business is involved in marijuana or cannabis. So I really am hoping that we can get to a point where the overall fees are reduced, because Mr. Sands is correct, Ms. Bell is correct, and I'm sure others listening will say, these businesses are mostly startups, small businesses, and they do not have necessarily the resources to do what they want to do by growing their business and buying the necessary equipment, meeting all the state compliance standards, which are far more significant than what we require in our community. And then on top of that, have to pay even these exorbitant licensing fees. But I'm sure Mr. Gallagher could provide some additional context as to what goes on behind the scenes. And I think that would be helpful. And I'm certainly more than happy to, provide any additional comment. I wrote a letter back in August that outlines a little bit more additional information as to why some of these changes should be made. And I attached it to this recent letter. To piggyback on Ms. Pelletier's conversation with the council a few weeks back, I thought she did a really great job articulating the desire of permitting that type of activity in Scarborough. And so if there's any questions on, I'm happy to answer it, but there is a push at the state for caregivers to transition to dispensaries in some cases. And so I think that's something we should certainly evaluate here, considering we permit all forms of cultivation and as well as manufacturing in our community. My letter also talks about two other minor points, a confidentiality provision. I really hope we can address this. And then separately, replacing the term marijuana with cannabis. And I'll leave Representative Talbot's testimony to the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee as the reasoning why that should happen. I think she did a nice job articulating that point. And lastly, I understand that there may not be a desire at this time to discuss retail. My subsequent letter asked that at some point this year, I'd like before June, to have a separate discussion on it. And I would add that as of right now, the state is, there's a bill passed out of the taxation committee, so it has not been voted on yet, where instead of doing revenue sharing with municipalities that have opted in to the program, they are considering using the excess funds that are derived from the taxes and adult use to provide some reimbursement to municipalities that opt in after, I think it's July 1st. And that doesn't necessarily mean like we can get reimbursed for the stuff we've already done, but if there was a decision to consider a retail ordinance, the town may be able to receive some reimbursement from the state from that. Now, that's assuming it becomes law. It had a overwhelming support, and it doesn't impact, from a financial standpoint, it doesn't take away any money. This is actually excess money that's available. So we're hopeful that it might go through the legislature and become law and might be available to the town potentially after July. But I'm here to answer any questions you may have about any of this.
Okay, thank you, John, for that. So what I'd like to do at this point, so there's a number of things there. So what I want to try to do is to, I'm not going to spend a lot more time on it since we had said this is going to be a discussion item. But I would like to ask Assistant Manager Liam Gallagher to please address some of the things that, what our experience has been with marijuana, and also some of the streamlining and some of the revisions that we've done already as a body to try to, make this a little bit easier. So Liam, if you could do that, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation amongst the three of us committee folks to determine what to do next. But I would just say in general, the ball, if you're going to be looking at us to kind of bring forward language and that sort of thing, like we did when we were promulgating these ordinances in the first place, I don't think you're going to, at least, well, I'm sure of ordinance, I'm not going to be leading that. That needs to come from, interested parties like yourself. And then the other thing I would suggest is you need to prioritize this so we have an idea of what's most important, A, and B, what is, what we think has the best chance of, getting support to be passed. So I know we each have our own ways of evaluating that, but that's my suggestion in terms of process. Jean Marie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I would need to know specifically, how do we compare to neighboring municipalities when it comes to fees and fee structures? Also, I know originally the requirement for operating agreement came out of the marijuana office in Augusta. But I'm not sure, I need to know,
Right.
what's going on more recently with them as far as, and I know it's been a bit of a moving target. I happened to be listening to Veterans and Legal Affairs hearing, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and there were a couple of things to do with marijuana on it. And I don't know, the committee sounds pretty divided, or it did at that point, but that's, neither here nor there. So I'm not sure, what will come out from there. Representative Chiazzo is the House Chair of VLA, so we could certainly get more information from him.
Okay.
So.
So with that, I'm going to come back around to this issue of sort of priority and also sort of what would be required to move things forward. My bias, though, is I will say, at this moment, I'm not willing to commit staff time, a lot of staff time to this. I would rather have the advocates and the interested parties spend time on that, have them bring forward, and then we can decide from there what ought to go forward, if anything at all. So Liam, go ahead. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think to address some of Mr. Burke's comments, I think that the ordinance as it currently sits does request or does require applicants to provide some documents that we, frankly, don't spend a lot of time considering. The operations agreement, we really don't spend a lot of time delving into that, and there's really no need for it. I think that the components that we care about at a local level are, we certainly want to ensure code compliance, fire code compliance. We want to make sure that the applicant's in good standing with the municipality with regard to fees. We want to make sure they have the necessary state paperwork, whether that's a caregiver certification or a conditional license from OMP. We want to go through our site, do our site inspection to verify all of those pieces. And beyond that, the two fundamental plans we do care about is their odor mitigation plan, particularly when it comes to cultivators. And we really care about their security plan, just from a general public safety standpoint. So those are the aspects of the license that we generally care about. There are other pieces that, you know, are required. And again, I wasn't involved in the initial discussions with the ordinance committee on the formation of this ordinance and the requirements that were included in there. But in practice, those are the pieces that staff really take a look at. With regard to fees, I have heard, you know, beyond a general criticism of the fee structure. Again, I personally wasn't party to the discussions on how those fees were crafted. I will say that the clerk's office has done a fairly recent, I think in the last few weeks, review of all municipal fees. And so we do have some raw data on other marijuana fees. I'm not sure how much, you know, obviously municipalities opted in and formulated their ordinances at different times. And I think the rationale for that, I can't speak to, but there has been a concern at times in conversations I've had with prospective applicants that are really very small scale caregivers, and they are producing, you know, oftentimes baked goods or other edibles for their patients, and their margins are not, at least it was been conveyed to me, is their margins are not so high that a $2,500 annual license fee is feasible for them. And so we've had people who have come in, had conversations, and then not moved forward with going through the licensing process. So I think one of the questions is a caregiver that is growing medicine for their patients has one fee at $750. A caregiver that is producing an edible for their patients has a very different fee. And so that's some of the feedback I've had from the community.
Thank you, Liam. Thanks. So the one thing I want to try to highlight here is that when we were adopting the ordinances, I don't think we exceeded the state in any place. We actually, you know, developed our ordinances from that. And admittedly, it's a new enterprise. It's a new business. So we were on the conservative side in terms of how we approached it. So, you know, I would think at this point, I think we should have some discussion about, you know, what, if anything, if any, the next step should be. But I think it is clear that we've tried to make some improvements in terms. I'm not going to go into details on fees, but you know, I believe we are attentive to what the public is saying. But so far, we've only heard from one side, and that's the folks that are in the business. We haven't really had time to really hear what the rest of the public thinks, and that would certainly come forward. I'm quite sure if we move anything forward. So I'm sort of at a status quo at the moment. I think we should have a little bit of a discussion about it. In terms of the fees, we had a lot of discussion about that. In fact, we actually reduced the fees from our very informal survey. We tried to peg our fees based upon neighboring communities, and we used Portland. We thought we'd err on the side of going high rather than low. We adjusted down from there. You know, how that's evolved over time, I don't know. But again, my point is, I don't want to do your homework for you. Okay. So if you've got if you really have a short list of critical few priorities, and let's see that, we're not really going to boil the ocean on this. So, and we've only heard from one side so far. So go ahead, Mr. Johnson. And then I want to hear from Jean Marie. Thanks.
Well, I think two things. I mean, they have boiled down their points. That's precisely what Mr. Burke's letter is. So he's done the homework. I specifically told Mr. Burke not to give us red line language because I didn't want to just drop that in front of the council. If I'm hearing that you want red line language brought to.
That's not what I'm saying. Not at all. No.
What are you saying then?
We're having a discussion.
Right. But
right now, based upon Mr. Burke's letter and your commentary, I don't have enough to know what the priorities are. Number number.
But there's
one.
4 clear priorities written in. So and I'm only trying to advocate for 2 of them.
So if you want to take those one by one, we can do that. But I am not requesting red line language. That's not what I'm proposing.
You told him to do his homework. So no, I'm just saying.
You're misinterpreting my comments.
What are you expecting next then? Let's be very clear so I can help, because I'm gonna work with him to produce something to put on the agenda. So what would
so
move
are you
it forward?
helping or are you advocating?
I'm advocating. I think that there are small business owners that are paying too much fees, and I think they should be lower. I am absolutely advocating.
And you have, then you have, I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
This is not purely informational, it's advocacy. And that you also, there are two other fellow members that, you know, will decide in a party of three what we're going to do, if anything, to go forward. So,
But when
so with that, this was intended as a discussion item.
I'm trying to say what we should do next, Mr. Chair.
I was asking the applicant for that, but if you want to speak on his behalf, go right ahead and we'll respond.
I will. Hold on. So let me finish my thoughts and then we can respond to it. What you have said is you're not interested to do your homework. And I guess so I'm asking you as chairman, I am advocating, this is a public meeting that I have brought forth something
As chairman or what?
that I'm allowed to advocate for. And I would like to have a real discussion on whether we should lower the fees and reduce the paperwork. Yes, I am that's what I'm allowed to do. So that is what I am doing. As far as the other side, so to speak, this is a specific fee we charge to a specific industry. This isn't some sort of public policy decision where somebody is going to get upset that we have lowered our fees for a very specific industry. So if the answer is it won't get on the agenda, just say that and we'll move on, because that will make my life easier. But how it would get on the agenda, I just want to know specifically how it get on the agenda, because the next specific step from his letter is to bring red line language, because his letter is very specific. That's all.
That's assuming the party, so if we want to defer, if you want to go that route, and all of a sudden we're doing things according to the discretion of the chair of the town council, you wouldn't have had to bring this up at all. Okay, and I'm suggesting that, so what I'm asking for, and I'm asking, you know, I appreciate you're bringing this to the table, us adding it to the agenda at the last minute, but putting it down as the first discussion item. And we listed a number of things. So you listed fees, but you didn't start with fees. You started with, and maybe this might help you in terms of my understanding of what you're trying to say. If I can confirm my understanding of that, you led with, first of all, an issue of filing an operating report.
Did you read the letter
I
that was
did.
sent? Okay.
Whoa.
This is your way up.
Guys. Can I get a word in
Yes,
edgewise,
Ms. Katerina,
please?
you may. You
Now,
may.
Mr. Johnson's walking away.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that the way to go with this, so we've had, you know, members of our community, business community have come forward saying, if I'm hearing them correctly, that they think our fees are excessive. So I agree with Mr. Hamel that if they think the fees are excessive, they need to show me anyway where they're excessive and how they are different from other municipalities around here. And I happen to be sitting here looking at like Portland's fees and Lewiston's fees and Auburn's fees, and we're about in line with all of those at this point. So I just need to know why are you saying these fees are too much? I know as a small business person, I own several small businesses, my husband and I, and we pay some crazy fees. One of them being that food handler's license that we have to pay $220 to produce bottles of honey that we don't even touch except take them from the bees and put them in a bottle. But that's, you know, neither here nor there, we pay it. But that, you know, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, yeah, I'd be interested in knowing this. I know, what was it, the operating agreement? And as I mentioned previously, I thought that came out of the Office of Marijuana, whatever they call themselves these days originally. And if in fact the state is not requiring that, I'd be fine looking at, you know, what do we need the operating agreement for necessarily? But there are other factors that come into play. Because I know, for example, we've had quite the time in Scarborough until recently with odor mitigation and having to go back and forth and back and in and out of places with that. Hopefully that's going to end. So I guess I'm a little not sure what the word redlining language is, but that being said, I would be happy to hear from Mr. Burke and others as to what their recommendations are, but I also want to hear I want to see facts and figures behind them. I don't want to just hear that it's too high and this is, we don't want to pay this. I want to hear that this is too high because all the neighboring municipalities are only charging half of what we are or whatever. Does that make sense? And Mr. Gallagher has his hand up.
Yeah, let me, go ahead. I'll try to restore some order to the meeting here. But I'm expecting now that we didn't really, I don't expect Mr. Johnson to be back. So, but it's not going to prevent us from deciding what we need to do and then moving on through the rest of the agenda. Go right ahead, Liam.
So perhaps, so it sounds like if I'm hearing the discussion correctly, I think that it'd be helpful to have some updated information on fees from neighboring municipalities. I think that Mr. Burke in his statement he just made suggested that he might want to relook at what his recommended fees would be. Would it make sense then as a next step on the issue of fees for staff to compile some of that data from neighboring municipalities to bring it forward to the committee for their review, allow Mr. Burke to revise. I think that he's issued, I think, at least 2 letters to the council in the last probably 12 months with some suggestions on other changes. Perhaps update that letter. And with regard to in that letter, I think will be that recommendation to streamline some of the documentation requirements, perhaps bring forward a clean copy, as again, he's certainly an advocate for the community, but bring forward that for another discussion in April with the ordinance committee. Would that be an appropriate next step?
So I think that's fair. And I appreciate your being willing to offer staff time to do some of this. But frankly, I would like the petitioners, including Mr. Johnson, who, was helpful in getting Mr. Burke back on the agenda. And we've worked pretty extensively with Mr. Burke and others along the way when we put these ordinances in place. So I don't want people to get the wrong impression. What I'm trying to establish is what the priorities are, number one, and number two, how the work is going to get done. My preference would be actually for the petitioner to gather information on the fees and to say specifically what they'd like them to be. So
Right. Justification.
Yes. And then we'll go from there. If there are other efficiencies we can find in terms of the documentation side of it, I'd be, happy, Liam, to hear for your suggestions on that. I'm not requesting red line language at this point in time. I'm not doing that. And so far, I want to be very clear. This is my opinion, and we'll actually vote on it. But my opinion is I do not hear a lot of support for revising the rules on caregiver and medical retail stores. That was the retail stores in particular was quite clear. The community was not in favor of that. And I know that though things may evolve over time and that those two particular areas of marijuana or cannabis products may change. I would rather have those practices change and then for us to revisit them rather than us to kind of lead the way to begin with retail stores that happen to be for something other than adult use. So that's my preference on it. So I'm willing to do this again, actually to have it as an agenda item, but I'm not looking for language other than as it relates to potentially fees and the administrative processes.
And I would, I just want to remind the public who may be watching this or see the tapes, that Mr. Burke is a paid advocate for the marijuana industry. And so he's doing his job. I mean, he's just doing his job. So I would be interested in seeing more facts, as I said, and figures about what's going on, because I don't think we're that far away from other big communities as far as our fees.
So with that, would you be willing to make a a recommendation in
Yeah.
terms of an action item for a next
Yeah,
meeting?
I would.
So that
add-
we're
I would-
providing clear direction to the folks that had raised this issue and including.
Do you want it
Mr.
on the next, what do you have, what do we have lined up? Because I don't see this as anything that's urgent,
No.
urgent. I just want to make sure.
Mr. Burke, do you have a preference for this in terms of what you'd like to see in terms of timing? You want the next meeting, or would it help you if we put it in a May agenda?
I want to address a couple points, Chairman Hamel, if I may, because there was some information that is factually not correct. And I think it's important that those listening, but also you and Councilor Caterina know this.
I'm going
not-
to ask you, Mr. Burke, I'm going to ask
Yeah.
you please to be brief in your comments. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not paid to do what I'm doing right now. I want to make sure that's very clear. I'm doing this as a resident of our community. So that's issue number one. Issue number two, there's statutory language in which a municipality must follow to create fees.
Right.
Using another municipality as a basis to create fees is not the standard. We should not be doing that.
one's
But
doing
and so regardless of what Portland's doing, and I'm happy to talk about what Portland does, it's substantially different than what we do in Scarborough. So using that as the model in which we base fees is not the standard that's provided by the state. And then that is included in my letter and supported by the Maine Municipal Association. So please read those letters. That information is in there. But as far as looking at, I'm sorry, I'll just finish on this one point here. As far as, providing any language, I certainly have provided it, but I'm happy to, I'm happy to do whatever you guys are, plan on moving forward. And if that means providing specific language, happy to do it. And I could certainly have something available to you in April, which I believe would be in the middle of April, if I'm correct.
John, I apologize if I misunderstood. I've always operated under the fact that you were lobbying or somehow or other had a legal relationship with providers, but so I apologize if I got that wrong. But I do, it would be helpful for, I think, this committee if you brought forward facts as to why these fees are so high. I don't happen to think that they particularly are, but show me. I need to be shown why ours is so high. And I'm not saying compared to community, but I can't imagine that there's too much difference in what goes on in Scarborough than goes on in Saco or goes on in South Portland or goes on in Portland, to be honest. But that's neither here nor there, and we don't need to get into any arguments about that. But I would like to see you, I'm not saying necessarily bring forward language, but you need to bring forward facts. The facts that people don't like what fees are. No one likes fees. But bring me the facts as to why these fees are onerous and why they're too much. That's all I'm asking for.
So with that, I'd like to make a motion that for the next meeting, and the one question I didn't really get an answer to, but what I'd like to see for the next meeting is for us to have this as an agenda item to address the matter of fees and to address the matter of administrative requirements as it relates to licensing and operation. Those are the only two things that I'm interested in having as agenda items, and that's the motion. And I'd look for a second on that.
Oh, sorry. I was writing. Yeah, I will second that. That sounds
Okay.
fine to me.
And can we vote on that?
Councilor Caterina,
Yes.
Councilor Hamel.
Yes. And Mr. Johnson is not able to vote in absentia. So we'll look to that, and hopefully Mr. Burke and the folks that are joining us are clear on that. That's sort of the opinion from the ordinance committee. We look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you. So we have two other items on the agenda this evening. And the next one was having to do with solar arrays and forest stands. So I thought we'd let Jay help us with that one. And we've read the materials that folks have sent. We've had a couple of letters that people have sent, which we've read. And we'll make sure that the letters that were sent are included with the minutes for this meeting, including the ones for the agenda item that we just covered.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Jay, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Councilor Hamel. Yeah, so just by way of background, I believe both of you were on the ordinance committee last year, but if not, you were certainly on council when we recently adopted new language for the for utility scale solar ordinance provisions. This to allow sort of large scale commercial solar in the community. That was a couple of years worth of process in developing the language. Really started with our sustainability committee and long range planning committee recommending up to this committee and so on through council. Through that whole process, there were really 4 known projects. And so through the fall and early winter, those projects all came forward to the town. So I thought it would be helpful just to provide a quick update and, without any desire for action by ordinance committee other than what you wish to direct us to do, but to let you know that those 4 projects that we knew about did come forward. 2 were approved, and those 2 were the project that was up on the Kimberly Clark capped landfill. That's actually the one that there was a site visit by this committee at. And the other one, it was off of a private road, I think Johnson Road, if I remember the name right. And it was an old, a borrow pit where someone had, been, what a borrow pit is. And so that was also approved. 2 other projects that were talked about or known through the process came forward, and those ultimately withdrew because they weren't able to meet the town's standard around no disturbance or I don't have it exactly in front of me, but in short, no disturbance to a forest stand. Essentially, any stand of trees can't be cut down to enable a solar farm. And so those were the projects. One was off of West Beach Ridge Road, between West Beach Ridge Road and the Turnpike. And the other one was on property commonly known as the Larry Farm, down off Route 1 as you get towards Saco Town Line. So really just bringing those to your attention for what it's worth. And like I said, staff doesn't have any direction at this time that we're suggesting in any way. We just thought it'd be good to know what happens with ordinances get approved. I thought you might like to know where we land. And then, as you noted, we did receive 2 letters because I have been in conversation, obviously, with those 2 projects that weren't able to move forward, as we typically are. They're always sort of curious as to what's going on. And when I told them I was planning on preparing a memo to this, to sort of just bring you up to speed, they also thought they would like the opportunity to speak as well. So you have their comments, and I think a few of them are online if you're going to open it.
Great. Liam, is there anything from a staff standpoint building on to Jay's overview? Thanks, Jay, for that.
No, none at this time, not
Okay.
beyond what was already provided to the committee.
I have a question.
Ms. Katerina, go ahead.
Yeah, remind me, because yes, I was running ordinance back then, but that's okay. So how does forest stand language get inserted in that?
Yeah, so yeah, we have a host of performance standards provisions, and in there, one of the interests is around preserving natural features. And so this statement really actually reads beyond just forest stands, and I'll read it briefly. It says, so it's provision C, natural resources, wetlands, vernal pools, working agricultural lands, forest stands, as defined by the shoreland zoning, surface waters and slope of greater than 20% shall be conserved. And it goes on, but that's really the piece that shall be preserved. And there was actually the original language that came out of committee. When I say committee, the advisory committees, sustainability and long range actually had, to the greatest practical extent, these things should be reviewed. But through this process, it was ordinance committee, I think, had, as I recall it, particular concerns around seeing, and I really, as I recall the conversation, concerns around people, around trees being cut for the development of solar. And that's how I sort of recall the conversation, and then the language morphing from that to the greatest practical extent into this shall piece. And again, I think as is referenced in one of the letters, we talked about at that time that this is really the only use that prohibits the cutting of trees before they go in. We talked about at the time that other than, but for an application for this use, folks do have the rights to cut trees on their property. So, that if that's a broader concern of the community, then there might be some other actions that the town could look at in terms of preservation. But again, just sort of to give some context, greater
remember
context to
that
that
now.
discussion we
Yeah.
had a year
Yeah.
or so ago.
Thank you. That revives my memory on this. And just as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, to me, it makes sense not to cut down trees, to put in solar, because it's like, trees are important to the environment, using solar as alternative energy. But yet, by the same time, we do want to go to solar. So I guess I would need a little more facts, not just, and I would like to get facts for someone other than people who whose projects are impacted by this, because they obviously are biased in their looking at this. So I'd be interested in knowing again, and I hate to say what other municipalities or whatever are doing as far as, are they allowing stands of trees to be cut down? I hate to see trees cut down. There's so many places in Scarborough where you could put solar. You don't have to cut down trees, but anyway, that's a discussion for another day, but that's where I'm leaning at this point,
Great.
Mr. Chair. So,
Great. Thanks, Jean Marie, and thanks, Jay. I think at this point, I'd like to hear from the folks that wrote letters. We've got we'll have public comment on this item at this time, and then we'll decide what any next step should be after that. So we've got Mr. Ross Shirt and Mr. Larry. So why don't we go in alphabetical order if they're both here?
If Mr. Rothschild or Mr. Larry would like to speak, you can raise your hand. I know we do have one other person who would like to make a public comment. I'm going to bring in Mr. Larry. So if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
Thank you. Not sure. I think you all had a chance to read my letter, or?
Yes, thank you. I just saw it today, but I read it before the meeting, so thank you.
So unless you want me to reread the letter, I wanted to make myself available. I really am very hopeful that, I'm just looking for a sensible solution, like I know Scarborough's gonna do. It just, the examples don't meet, I think, the intent of passing the ordinance that you did pass. And the language just really kills any use. I mean, I have 70 acres of forest, and I'm talking about 10 that will allow me to preserve the other 60. And so that's really like the way I'm thinking about it. And if anyone has a question about it, because we spent a lot of time, making sure that my neighbors and doubling the setback and the carbon, I think it's 7,000 times, whatever. I mean, Mr. Roschert can go over the facts of what we're doing, but this farm is very important to me, and I wouldn't do something that changed its character. That's probably the most important thing going on in my life right now. So, if anybody does have any questions about what we're trying to do, or, how I came about this, then I'd be very happy to answer. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
So thanks, Mr. Larry. Thanks. And Mr. Rothschild, if we could hear from you, and then we'll have a little discussion on this amongst ourselves. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Rothschild.
Greg, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak. There you go.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Welcome.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for taking this on your agenda today. This is important to us, obviously, and I think to the development of solar in Scarborough going forward. So I won't repeat everything in the letter I sent to the town, but I will just express again that we support the review of this forest stand language in the natural resources performance standard of the ordinance. I'm not sure if it was the intention, but this language does turn out to be an effective ban on tree clearing entirely in town, given its broad language. We feel that the town can promote ecological responsibility with solar projects without an effective ban on tree clearing. It is a very high electrical load town, so I do think it's important to promote solar development in the right areas of town. I only point that out just because this property is right off of Route 1, not visible from Route 1, but it's a property that would interconnect on Route 1 where there's already three-phase right down the street from the Dunston substation, a lot of electrical load in the area. So a reconsideration of the forest stand language wouldn't result in solar projects just popping up on forested properties all over town. There's only so much electrical load and so many sites that make sense from an electrical standpoint.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just have a bit more. So I think that, sorry, I'm sniffling too, I'm a little sick, but we didn't notice any other commercial or industrial uses in town that limit the vegetation or removal of vegetation so strictly like this language does. One example that we found was cell towers, which are permittable in the same zone that we're talking about with our, and the requirement is just to limit clearing as much as possible and do additional plantings as much as possible. No strict prohibition on removal of vegetation. And obviously, solar does provide some immense environmental benefits that infinitely outweigh the negative impact of removing trees. The carbon dioxide offset in the case of this project is equivalent to plantings of almost 4,000 acres of trees. I think that's about it. I mean, we do have a robust landscaping plan that includes pollinator seed, additional plantings that our registered landscape architect has determined would have an ecological benefit to the property. So I think this is something that should just be on a case-by-case basis. We have a really, really good site. We have an interconnection agreement with Central Maine Power, and I don't know exactly what direction the town would want to go after this meeting, but it does seem appropriate to review this language and figure out a way to promote responsible solar projects like this one.
Great. Thanks very much. I was just going to ask a couple questions if I may. Jay, so when we drafted this language, did we use any particular model for it? Or I mean, the forest stance language, or was it just, I mean, we had to come from someplace. So I'm just kind of wondering, what the origin was of it.
So let's see, I can speak to the forest stands. We use the definition and it spells it out in here, the definition in our shoreland zoning ordinance. We actually have a definition of forest stands, and it is very broad. If you got a couple trees, you got a forest stand. I mean, it gets a little,
Can't do much to touch the
you can't
forest.
do much to touch trees. Where the original language came from, I will, I'll have to get back to you. I know Sustainability Committee working with Jamie Fitch really sort of took the laboring oar in getting this sort of rolling. And I do think there was some model ordinance. I know we looked at a number of different communities. Now, whether this natural resource language was in that model ordinance in other communities, I can't tell you offhand, but I'm inferring that it might have been, but
Great. So, I think we have a pretty good handle on the problem statement. I think it's, go ahead. Man.
I just want to point out, we do have one more person.
Oh, fine. Let's go ahead.
Ken, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak. Ken, we can't hear you. I'm not sure if.
You are unmuted. I think you need to, yeah, turn off his other person. Can you, does the top one have the ability to speak right now? The top, okay.
Yeah, he does.
I think-
Hello, Ken. All right. Oh, there he is.
He's on mute now.
He's on mute.
Ken, you're on mute, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
Again,
Wow. I did.
welcome.
Oh, there's an echo. Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah, I didn't mean to have the camera on either. I'm sorry. Hey, I can express, yeah, I don't think this is going to work with the feedback, but if you get a chance, just look at the material that was brought before the ordinance committee for this event.
Ken,
I think he fixed.
Ken, you're actually
technically-
good if you want to speak again. I think we took care of the feedback.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, and no echo,
Okay, great.
but it did
Yeah,
add
just-
emphasis to your remarks, so it was
Yeah,
effective.
When this was brought forward, the way it was presented and understood by me being on the original ordinance committee when this came forward was, this was to allow farming on land that was really not farmable, was not viable to farm. And it wasn't supposed to be in addition to farming by allowing cutting of trees to expand the area to do both. That's the only thing I wanted to interject on. I'm not sure if that's what this applicant is intended to do. I just think it's important for the current ordinance committee to understand that. Because that's why the landfill was a perfect opportunity for it. You can't do anything on a landfill. There were several other applicants in the forefront, and I think they were all attending this meeting, and that was stressed extremely hard. This was an option for a farmer that was not farming to farm solar, but not to have your cake and eat it too. And I'll end my comments with that.
Ken, can I ask you, Ken, can I ask while you're here, can I ask you a question? What we're trying to determine is we've got a problem statement. We're trying to determine what the next step should be. In your view, does it make sense for us to explore alternatives to the forest stand language, revising it? But it does seem that there's no way to allow trees at all during, in the area where the arrays are going. But do you have any sense on that or any thoughts?
No, that was discussed, and I know Jay mentioned similar to what he had just done, that, I mean, if you have trees on your land, you're allowed to cut them. And if they were building homes, they would cut the trees. Absolutely no argument here. Again, I just don't think it folded in with the intent of a brand new industry coming into town on unfarmable land. That's what the driving force was. If you go back and look at the introduction material brought forth by the Sustainability Committee with Jamie, it clearly states that. It was not in addition to farming. It was in farming in lieu of the land just sitting there.
Great.
It gave some of our farmers a
Cleared
great
land. Already
opportunity
cleared.
to get some revenue out of some land that otherwise could not be done.
Ken, that was already cleared land, right? Correct? Ken?
Yeah, well, I mean, the ones that were in front of us were all
Right.
kind of field at the time, and the one
Right.
over on Route 1, I don't know if that's where the applicant, if one of the applicants is that, the one on Route 1
Yes.
over by Chaba, I mean, that's got to be 40 acres of just field. So we actually were a little concerned about the visibility from Route 1, so I think we folded in some loose fencing for
Right.
screening. But there was plenty of land there for a 25-acre farm.
Well, yeah, Mr. Leary is one of the people bringing this forward as a concern.
And
So,
Mr. Landry was involved, I do believe was present during all these meetings when this was discussed.
yes, he was.
Yep.
Thank you. So,
Anyway.
go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
It's just a thought, just a thought. I know we, because we've had a change of folks on the ordinance who didn't have the background, but it was a good discussion. I kind of hope we keep it that way, but I always have that opportunity at the council.
Okay. So question for the group is, so next steps. I'm all in favor of pursuing something in terms of moving from problem statement to proposing solutions. But here again, it's sort of, if the folks are closest to it, don't really have a suggestion for next step or alternative language, would it be worthwhile for us to spend some time to, ask the sustainability committee to see if there's something that might be worth additional time and study, but or not, or from the folks who have sent us letters and, want to build the arrays.
I guess if I might start to provide from staffing perspective, it'd be helpful to understand what the policy directive and interest of this committee is. Are you interested, as I think Mr. Johnson just said, at the time when this was adopted, it was explicitly talked about that the policy direction was, no, we don't want to see trees cut for solar farms to go in. That was, I can't say it any more clear than that as far as the policy direction. We had lots of discussion around that about the pros and cons and what have you, and we landed where we landed. So now I guess I would pose the question back to you two as to, do you wish to have staff, 6-8 months later, explore that same policy question?
This is a good example of this totally new territory. We did the same thing with electrical vehicle chargers and that sort of thing. It's just totally new, and we're trying to learn about it. That said, I think both you and Councillor Johnson have articulated very well that the direction was clear when this was done. So I think it's unfortunate that we have a couple of applicants who are not able to do what they had intended to do because of that. But we haven't even heard from the other side yet. The folks that are advocates for, this is a pretty big, important part of our comprehensive plan, preserving, trying to balance development with preservation of natural resources. And
Right. And my concern is, if we say, well, if they're only removing a few trees, are we letting the camel's nose under the tent, with other things? I don't know. The more I'm sitting here and thinking through and remembering what went on, I'm thinking, I think just leave it as status quo for now.
yeah, I think that's where I am on it. And for the applicants, I'd turn to you again and ask for you to help us understand if there is, there are some developments and there are some mitigation efforts that have been successful in other areas. But without those, I don't know that it makes sense for us as a committee to proceed until we have more data from the folks that are trying to revise the ordinance.
Yeah, and as I said, I want to know more info from people who aren't affected.
Right.
Too. I mean, what's going on
Right.
in the bigger world. But that being said, Scarborough and sustainability and others were very clear that they didn't want to see clear cutting occur, so to speak, or the clearing of forests stands to put in solar arrays. Put them where you've already got the space to do them, and without affecting vegetation.
Go ahead, Jane.
Go ahead.
If I may, I just want to just for a point of clarity, because I do know when the language initially came to this
Right.
committee, it did, just as a reminder, have that language
Right.
sort of that sneaky out, if you will, the camel's nose under the tent,
Yes.
of to the greatest practical extent, these things shall be preserved. It
Okay.
was that to the greatest practical extent, which was taken out of the language at this level and sort of
Sure.
that's where the ordinance, or I'm sorry, the applications came to my department. We did our review and said, sorry, language says shall, it gives no
There's no wiggle
opportunity
room.
for discussion to the greatest practical
Right.
extent. So just I just add that for clarity, because that is what
But
came
there
to you
was-
from the committees.
But if I'm remembering correctly, and I stand to be corrected, there was pushback from counselors at the time that they did not want to see everybody coming in here with solar development, buying up big tracts of land and taking down trees. And if I'm remembering
No,
that
and that-
correctly.
That is
so-
absolutely correct. It is at this committee level. And I think Counselor Ken Johnson,
Right.
when he spoke, that was the explicit discussion that happened between the three
Right.
ordinance committee
Right,
votes.
and
So,
then when it went
and
to
then when it
council,
went to
it was the
council,
same thing. It was
correct.
the same thing.
So I was just,
Thanks, Jen.
yep.
Liam, you had something you wanted to add. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess the question for I think the committee is, and I know there's two of you speaking and there's 5 others somewhere else. I'll have to weigh in on it. But I think the question is, in your minds, would there ever be some level of tree removal that would warrant or offset the benefits of solar? And I think
Yeah.
we don't know what the answers are, but I think
Mhm.
that's one of one of the advocates for one of the applicants is suggesting is that there may be a very compelling reason or justification for some limited tree removal
Right,
for the benefits of otherwise
Right.
solar. So I think if that's something that you two are interested in knowing more about, and again, I think some of that would have to come from the applicants and I
Right.
know that you want to see the kind of the other side of it. I think that's the question perhaps worthy of some additional consideration.
and I could go with that. I mean, I'm not the type to just slam the door. Unless, if I think there's more information out there to be gleaned. And I think that's a good point, that if it's, minimal, if but for, a tree stand of 5 trees, they could put this in, that sort of, or can they mitigate like we do with wetlands,
I think, I'm sorry to
Yeah,
jump
no,
in,
that's
if you
fine.
don't mind, just, I will say with both the 2 projects that were before the town, if I'm not mistaken, the whole project was forested. I don't
Oh.
think that neither of these were sort of on the margins. Now, there may be a project down the road that's on the,
Right.
but I just want to be very clear about that,
Yes.
that,
I don't see cutting down trees to put in solar myself, clearing. I could maybe see 5
Right,
take 5
just
trees
sort of-
down or a small amount of trees
Okay.
down.
yep,
So I think you have our feedback. I think we would look for the applicants and also, others to suggest possible approaches that could include mitigation or softening of the language. But I'm not going to request a motion for an action item to
No.
commit that. Okay, so
No,
but I think you
and-
have our feedback and we'd be willing to continue the dialogue. I think we
Right.
also, if that were the case, we'll make sure that the folks on the environmental side, we hear from them as well.
Right.
Um,
And when you talk about taking down trees, a lot of trees down, you're affecting habitat.
Right.
It's not just, offset one for
Okay.
the other.
Anything further on that then? And with that, we have lot frontage.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. We said it was a short agenda and we really wasn't going to talk about, so should never say that.
Next.
Yeah, sorry to make you wait.
I'll remember that. Short agenda.
Yeah. Never say never.
Sure. So you've got in your packets the reminder that about, I think it was 2018, we first came to the board or the committee and asked if you would be interested in looking at some possible amendments to the corner lot, really dealing with corner lots and lots with multiple frontages. And this came as a recommendation from the Board of Appeals. They hear a lot of appeals to try to reduce some of those front setbacks on corner lots and lots with multiple frontages. And of course, it's never predictable if an applicant has to come to the board, they don't know if they're going to get a yes or a no, and every case is different. And so the board, the committee at that time said, yeah, go look into it and come back with, some discussion items and some thoughts. And that's what we did. In the process of doing that, I did kind of poll some of the surrounding communities and there was kind of 50% of them were doing pretty much what we're doing. 50% of them had a different way of doing them. I know some of the communities I've worked in the past had a different way of doing it. There's no right or wrong way. There's just different ways. And so what we did, or what you have in front of you, was a thought that we had. And really, Jay was very instrumental in saying, let's look at the definition of how we call, instead of corner lots, if you read the definition or current definition of corner lots, it just gets you right back to the frontage requirement. It's, even though it has a lot of words in it, it never gets you anywhere. So he said, let's take a look at the definition of yard front, because that's how our ordinance is set up. It says yards front, side, and rear. And so we kind of have an A and a B situation. And so I have seen this done in some communities. You can see on the sketch, if you're on a corner lot, and you pick your principal frontage, it's either going to be usually the frontage where your driveway is, or the clear front of your house, maybe where the street number is and your address is. It could be on a side street, or it could be on another street, but you get to pick that frontage, and then the other side, or the non-principal frontage, you take half of the required front setback on that. So for the RF zone, for example, it's 50 feet. Now you go down to 25 feet.
Right.
If it's in the R4, it's 30 feet. And now you go down to 15, which is the normal side setback for most residential properties. If it's 40, it's 20. So it's in between. We're not just saying, oh, automatically go to 15. You could, but we're saying just take half of that. And that way, maybe you're not you're not going to stick out as much, with the properties on the side street. So that was one suggestion for the corner lot. And the language, I think, is the important thing. And you can see the cross through language is stuff that we don't think gets us anywhere. And we're proposing that maybe that could be removed. Again, that's just a discussion point at this point. And then for yards with multiple frontages, this is particularly prevalent down in the Prouts Neck area off Black Point Road, the Pinewood Circle, and Massacre and Sacarapa and Garrison. You're not going to find this too many other places, although I would dare to say you're going to find it in a few other places in town, maybe even up in Oak Hill.
I think it applies to my street. Someone on the corner lot.
Yes, it could down in, yeah, there's probably a few, although there's very few, Dawn, that go from one street to another, but you're right. That's another example where the streets are fairly close together, the lot sizes are small, and it could happen.
Thank you.
And so, kind of the same thing. You pick your primary frontage, whichever street that's on, because you do have situations where it could be either. And then the secondary frontages, you take half of the required front yard setback. And we can help applicants. That way they have a predictable outcome when they want to do an addition, or particularly in a tear down rebuild, because usually it's a non-conforming structure.
Yeah.
And our ordinance says if you're going to tear it down voluntarily, now you have to meet setbacks. Well, they've got no building window if they've got two frontages. So this gives them at least a fighting chance at having something that's usable, something that benefits the community as well, and still respects that frontage requirement a little bit.
I like the using that not less than 50% of the front yard, as opposed to automatically going to whatever the side yard setback is. I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense.
So really, that in a nutshell, that's really what we're bringing to you right now for, again, discussion purposes. But if you like what you see and you think it might float with the council, then we could move forward from there, or we can go back to the drawing board and look for something else.
Right. No, it's been very clear. Thanks, Brian, for this. I'm spatially challenged, so you're talking through this is very helpful. Thank you for that.
I see it all the time in my business.
Good thing. So with that, we'd be happy to, unless there's other discussion or input from the public or from staff. Liam? Okay. So would entertain a motion.
They're all exhausted. They've
Well,
left.
you didn't see any, you see any more?
Does anybody want to comment on this issue from the public?
No.
So
I would move this straight to council.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Councilor
Everybody.
Katarina,
Yes.
Councilor Campbell.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. See, it was worth the wait, Brian.
That was
Best for
quick like a button. With that, I think we're going to spend a minute talking about, is there any other public comment before we'll do next meeting agenda items. But any other comment from the public? Allison, I see you there. Okay. So how about next time?
Sorry, I just.
How about agenda items?
Come through. I had to be-
Sorry, no
Sorry.
trouble.
I was supposed to have been done with this meeting by now.
Is there anything from staff for next time, Liam?
Yeah, we're gonna bring back the manufactured housing, I
Great.
believe, the work done on that for April. Again, it sounds like we'll bring back some discussions on the marijuana ordinance.
Yep.
I haven't gone back to look at the list of topics for this year, but I'm sure that there may be at least one other thing we could add to the agenda to keep things moving, but I can circle back with the chair after the meeting. to
Terrific.
discuss.
Okay. So we'll just leave it open. I think, so it sounds like marijuana would be the only one. And then a lot, again, that's sort of fallen, it's in the court of the folks, that spoke this evening and, with the direction that we gave for them in terms of what we'd be looking for.
What's the date of our next meeting?
What is the date?
21st.
21st.
So, sounds right.
I better put it in.
And with that,
I move to adjourn.
okay, and I'll second that.
Katerina?
Yes.
Councilman Ham?
Yes.